Moment. Before we get started, I want to ask you to please put any questions that you have during the presentation in the chat, and they will be answered at the end. So I'll be monitoring the chat. My name is Lizzie Borges. I'm the moderator of today's session, and I'd like to introduce Lisa Meléndez, who will be presenting. Please keep your microphones and cameras off, but if you would like to ask a question at the end, you can ask us and we will unmute you. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll hand it off to Lisa.
Okay, thank you. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Lizzie, for helping out. I'm really glad that we can come together today to share some ideas about mental health and wellness in libraries in particular. As my title suggests, I'm going to discuss a little bit about shifting the pace and how we might be able to incorporate small practices for pausing in order to give ourselves a bit more self-care and sustenance while we're at work. So to do this, my first slide mentions this idea of how do we facilitate meaningful connections? Because in my mind, part of self-care is ensuring that we are doing what we set out to do. And when I think back to library school, one of the things I really walked away with after graduating and 30 so years ago was one professor said to me, what you're going to do is facilitate meaningful connections between people and information. So as the years went on, and I worked at a big university and then at a few community college where I still am today, I'd say about 10 or so years ago, I started to notice that the way students in particular and others were interacting with information was changing quite a bit. And there was a heavy, heavy emphasis on just get it done. Let's get the end product. Never mind how meaningful it is or digesting the information. And as somebody that teaches a lot in the library, this was quite disconcerting. So I even remember one day I was helping a student and he said, look, I really, the whole paper is done. I just need to shove, his words, some information in there for a citation. So that made me question my role, this idea of meaningfulness. And I think without meaning in our work, we start to feel more burnt out, right? So I started to turn to my studies. I practiced yoga for a while. I also studied and I'm trained and have gone through various programs since. And one of the definitions that kept coming to me in thinking about how can those studies address what I'm seeing was the idea of relationship and the idea of protection. These are some simple definitions of yoga, if you're familiar or not. But in terms of like getting students to maybe slow down, but also the staff and the rest of us that are helping them achieve their goals, since COVID, it really became more uncertain, more unpredictable. We have understaffing, we have less people feeling good about what they're doing. So this all added to the stress. And I really turned to this idea because we're in relationship with our patrons, our students, the bigger college community, if that's the environment that you are a librarian in or a library worker. We're in a relationship with ourselves, with the information that we're, facilitating connection to. But there's also a level of protection that resounds with me when I think about self-care, because the need to stay grounded and centered, let's say, the struggle to avoid burnout, the low morale that was mentioned before. I see that a lot with my colleagues, changing situations constantly, some of it due to technology, some other reasons, but that can be quite exhausting. So those I was seeing as, let's say, external factors, right? Things that can be draining on us. And when I think about yoga in particular, yoga isn't really about a relationship with oneself. So I was looking for ways to do this. And just to get started, I thought, well, let's just take a moment to pause, as I suggest in the title. And I'm going to ask you to go along with me if you don't mind. But I would suggest that you sit up nice and straight, or if you're lying down or standing, whatever comfortable position you can be in. Okay, we're going to give ourselves a moment of pause. I'm going to ask that you close your eyes. If you're not comfortable doing that, please don't. You can leave your eyes open. We're going to take a few breaths, but we're also going to take our hand and place it slightly in front of our mouth. So just a few inches. I'll turn to the side if you want to take a peek. And we'll take a few breaths. On the inhale, we're coming through our nose. And as you exhale, gently exhale, but blow out through your mouth. And a few more times. Two more breaths, just like this. In through the nose and out through the mouth, so that you could feel the breath on your hand. Then you can open your eyes, maybe shift around a little bit if you need to. Then you can lower your hand. So this 5 or 6 breaths, everybody breathes a little different, is something that I was tending to do in one of my research classes. And some people call it take 5, take 6. I had my students at the beginning of every class, we would do this together. It was a transitional space for them, simple enough to do. And it was also for myself. It was a way that I was trying to go back and create community with my students so that we could be present for what we were going to, learn about together, let's say, or research methods. That was the class. So think about how that experience feels for you, and maybe that's something you can quite simply incorporate, right? Because our breath is always with us. So a little bit more about yoga, which, breath is obviously one of the big tools of yoga, but there are 4 chapters to one of the main texts that we refer to. And the first chapter talks about what yoga is. And I thought I'd just mention this quickly because I don't know what people's experience is, but many times, especially today, people think of yoga and they think of the body and they think of doing odd things with the body, etc. But really, yoga is about refining the mind so that is in a calm state. And if we think about an academic environment or a library environment, when we're in a calm state, the mind is more present, there's more clarity. And, if you're a student or faculty or somebody who's interested in learning about something, obviously the quality of your attention is something that's, quite useful. And this state, I would say, aligns with self-care. Whereas a more distracted mind, a multitasking mind, which I'm not, saying there's anything bad with doing that, but it isn't always very present. It could be very stressed out. And those are the things that could pull away from our internal state to all those external factors that I mentioned just a little bit ago. So the second chapter of the Yoga Sutras, and the sutras are what they call aphorisms or threads. There's 50 some odd in each chapter, really get into detail about what this is all about. But the first chapter defines what it is. The second chapter focuses on how do we get there, right? How do we essentially move from a state of being on autopilot, mechanical, to a place where we can be a bit more aware and function from that place, right? A grounded place. Also, in thinking about the academic environment, to me, that sort of leans towards choice, discernment, and the development of what in academic libraries, we try to teach a lot, which are critical thinking skills. So I see all of those things as somewhat aligning. But when we're talking about self-care as librarians and library workers, these things are also really important, because the more we develop awareness, the more we can choose, right? And this could be on the mat, off the mat. So a little practical example is when I first started practicing yoga, I realized that whenever I overate, my asthma would really get set off, right? So over time, I worked purposely to break that pattern, right? I'm not saying I did it perfectly, but this is a practice, right? It's a practice on how to pause, how to interrupt patterns that don't really serve us or habits that don't really serve us. So we might start to consider, and if something comes to your mind, maybe you want to jot it down, some of your patterns, what we would call samskaras in yoga, or habits that don't serve you at work, right? Always saying yes, maybe not taking the time for transition before you go into teach a class or out to the reference desk. What are those spaces that, there's room for a different kind of approach? You might want to ask yourself that as we go along. The reason being that this slide here, there's a concept called dukkam, which is constriction, although the arrows are shooting out, I'll explain in a minute, and sukham, where the arrows are shooting in. So again, external factors are draining, pulling us in all kinds of directions. Oh, I have this project to do. Oh, I forgot about that meeting. Do, right? And when we're not paying full attention to all of that and how it's making us feel, these things might show up, in our leaning over. Even think about all the work we do on computers, how that affects our posture, right? That constricts our breathing. So there's all these links. Whereas sukham, I'm still going to go to my meeting, I'm still going to teach my class, but I'm going to intentionally do it from a different place. And again, this comes with practice. In public service, we want to promote, we want to provide, we want to offer, we want to answer the questions. So it's important to give ourselves some grounding on a regular basis, okay, so that we can do that in a good way. These are some of the basic ideas, and we are going to do one or two other little practices as we go along. I'm going to keep my eye on the time here just to be sure we have time. But these are some of the things to think about. We want to be present. We want to say, yes, I'm going to do this. This is for me, okay? This isn't, I'm waiting. I mean, policy and all that is extremely important, but I'm going to do this for me, okay? Rather than somebody else do it for me. That alone is empowering. What space can I do it in? That's why I'm leaning on the breath here, because breath work is always with you. Your breath is accessible. You can use it anytime, anywhere, right? And the goal is to feel easeful and present in what we do, but to maybe also step out of that automatic reaction. I think often, there's some students that come in and they're, I could sit there and go, oh no, not this again. I've been through this before with this student. This is, totally stressful. Somebody else help this person. And I've done that. But then at times where I've kind of grounded myself, I've been able to approach that person differently and work with them. So coming back to the breath, there's 4 parts. We always think of our inhalation and exhalation, but there's also these pauses that surround the breath, okay? And when you fully inhale, you'll notice there's a natural pause, and then you fully exhale, and there's another natural pause. So, when you leave today, maybe you can sit with that a little bit and incorporate the pauses in your awareness of paying attention to your breath. I'm going to help us do that just a little bit. So I'm going to ask, let's see, yeah, we have a few minutes. Let's just try at least one more technique. This is called nyasa, okay? And nyasa is gesturing. So anytime, anywhere, because you might be thinking, well, how am I going to do these things at the reference desk or in my office? These are very easy to do anywhere. I'm going to just show you my hands, but the idea is we're going to run our thumb up the finger as we inhale and lower it down as we exhale. That's it. And then we move to the next finger. So you can close your eyes and sit up. And when you inhale, run your thumb up one finger. And as you exhale, run it down the next. And just go from finger to finger. We'll do this just for a few breaths so you can get a sense of what this feels like. And the idea is to try not to rush. But as you inhale, you slide your thumb up. Notice that pause. And as you exhale, you slide your thumb down in the same way, noticing the pause. Then you go from finger to finger, starting over. And perhaps you can imagine doing this, before you go out to the reference desk, decide, I'm going to do this for 4 breaths. I'm going to do this for 8 breaths, or before a meeting, or whenever you feel that you need to sort of just slow things down a little bit. Okay. So take one more breath in the same way. Then slide the thumb down as you exhale at your own pace. And then you can open your eyes again. And in the interest of time, just going to mention that Bhavana, or visualization, is another technique. And these techniques, there's nothing magical about them. It's not like, oh, wait, did she say to do it like this? Because there's ways to combine and use sound, as you can see on the screen, to do this as well. You can move your arms a little. So there's varieties, and the idea really is to figure out what works for you. Okay, what kind of space are you in? Can you easily close a door? Can you put your hands under your desk and just do this a few times? Maybe linger with the pause a little bit if it's a more stressful situation. Okay. But I would like, I see there's some chats and things happening, so I want to make sure we have time for that. I was going to do one more practice, but I'd rather leave some time to answer direct questions. And then this last slide is my contact information. I'm happy if you reach out to me, as we go forward. I'd love to discuss this stuff more. And the book that's mentioned at the bottom, being in the library, this is my one of my main reference sources in the tradition that I studied in. I think it's extremely helpful and very accessible. So I thought I'd share that as well. Okay. So Lizzie, I think you're going to sort of read out the questions, or if people are able to unmute, we can go that route as well.
Yeah, so we have, okay, so there's a question about sharing the link in the chat, which then Heather did, thank you.
Okay.
And then another person had a question about what was the first technique that you shared?
We're just breathing in front of the mouth like this. So, putting the hand in front of the mouth. And, I've read things you can put an object, like if you're working with kids, for instance, a feather or something like that. There's no specific name for it. The way I've studied yoga, there are lots of different tools, because there's lots of different kinds of people. And what resonates with you may be different from what resonates with somebody else. That being said, I would encourage people to really explore what works for them on a regular basis, 5 minutes a day, so that you can use it to help for self-care when times get a little tougher. Okay, I think it's hard to go do something when, everything's going a little berserk, right? It's good to know what works for you. Chanting works a lot for me. But this technique was simply inhaling through the nose and blowing out through the mouth so that you can feel it on your hand. And that's one way to make the breath more tangible, right? Because sometimes our mind wants to go a little bit. So that extra brings it a little more into the present, I'll say, or tangible. I hope that answers that.
Thank you. And then there's another question about, what do you mean by visualization? Is there anything in particular to think of?
Again, visualization is one of the tools, and I would not say there's anything in particular to think of, but to think of something that is pleasing and comfortable for you, that you know brings you a sense of peace. So if you like to walk on the beach, for instance, maybe when you visualize, you can sit, take a few breaths with your eyes closed, see that place. You can also inhale the qualities of what you like about that place, and then exhale, just be with it. In yoga, we work a lot with teachers, even one-on-one, and I still do. Not everybody feels good at the beach, and that could be for different reasons, right? So, or maybe I have a strong affinity for trees, right? So I find trees really grounding, and I personally do. So those might be things I work with in terms of visualization. The other thing, I think, in libraries, we are a lot in front of computers, our eyes can be tired. So I would even suggest, rubbing the hands, exhale, palm the eyes, and maybe take a few breaths. If you want, visualizing some object or some place, but always something that is pleasing, okay? Lots of ways to do it.
Thank you. And then another question asking, can you go back to the slide before the one as breath as a tool?
This one?
Yes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone asked, is there something we can do while on the desk to ground ourselves? So when we can't step away, do you have recommendations for that?
Yeah, so this idea of yukti, or resourcefulness, one of the questions I wrote down when I was thinking about this is, what kind of space am I in, right? I'm not going to stand up at the reference desk and, do something crazy, whatever, a twist even, but even a twist sometimes could feel good, but you have to do it very with your breath. So when you twist, I'll just say this because I see a lot of students and a lot of people kind of tug themselves. You always twist on an exhale because your belly's naturally contracting. So it's very intentional. When you come aligned in the middle, you're inhaling. And when you're twisting and your belly's contracting, you're exhaling. But at the desk, and I have done this thing that we did with the sliding of the fingers, I had a student that was, a bit demanding and a little intense to work with. And I had that moment where I was aware that I wanted to get up and walk away. But I chose to sit up. I put my hands under the desk where nobody could see. And I started to do this, as I was listening and interacting with this person. So I think it's a technique that can be used anywhere, really. Sometimes I kind of put a little pressure on the end of the inhale or even at the end of the exhale, just to kind of slow it down a little bit more and remind myself that, I want to be present with this person. I want to see this differently and try to make it a good, easeful experience. The other thing is, if your hands are more visible at the desk, you can always place them on your lower belly. This is also comforting for me. on the chest is a little more obvious, but the lower belly, and to just kind of tune into the movement of that space where your hands are as you inhale and as you exhale. But again, I would suggest trying to develop an awareness of the pauses, right? We think of inhale, we think of exhale, but there are pauses that are very natural that surround that. I'm not saying hold your breath. We don't want to do that. And you'll notice when you get stressed or worried or distracted, many times we catch ourselves holding our breath or clenching, right? So you might start associating every time I touch my belly, I'm going to make sure I'm breathing freely. So this is another way to do that. Feel your feet on the floor. For some people, that's enough. Okay. More?
Great. Thank you. So another question from the chat is about people who don't imagine things. So when they're in downtime, they're thinking of grocery lists or projects they have to work on. Does imagination affect the technique of visualization?
That's a really good question. If you work with a teacher might, one-on-one or something like that might be able to work with that. It's not that you have to use visualization. For instance, sound might be more appealing for you to work with, right? And excuse me, the other thing is, this is all about practice, right? So many people say, well, you led us through a visualization in class, but my mind was over there. I was thinking about shopping, whatever, cooking. Okay, that's what happened today. Let's try it again next time, So over time, practice can help interrupt what our mind is used to doing. And in fact, that's why I had this slide here. Again, we tend to think about the body a lot in yoga, but the first chapter, the very first sutra says, I'm here, I'm ready to practice. Okay, so there's a purposefulness there, a commitment, let's say. And then the very second sutra is focused on what yoga is, which is directing the mind and sustaining that focus. Which is why I think it's really hard for people to just sit and meditate just like that, right? But directing the mind. So maybe the visualization isn't working for me today. I'm going to keep trying. Maybe I'll work with a guided meditation. Maybe that works better for me. Or maybe I'll take a silent walk and try observing what's actually there. Okay, that's just asking you to look and observe. So over time, things can shift as well. And, maybe there's a different tool that's more useful to you, so I try to work with breath here very quickly today because we all have it, right? So we become aware of our breath, we become aware of our patterns, and then we can use these other techniques in combination with breathing to sort of see what we can do. Because as we say in yoga, where the breath goes, so if we can slow down the breath, let's say, the mind will follow. The mind will become calmer. Not that the mind isn't going to become slower, right? And if visualization doesn't work, perhaps sound works, right? So inhale. Maybe you like to hum. Maybe you find that soothing while your hands are on your belly. Yeah, so there's lots of different tools for different needs, and those change over time, and how we combine them is also impactful. Okay. Do we have time for one more, or
Yeah, I think we have one more minute. So someone shared that they have anxiety and other mental health issues. And so they were wondering what they could try when they have trouble focusing.
Yeah, so this is a very difficult question, because I, don't know who's asking this question, nor do I know the cause of that anxiety or, so we like to know who's in front of us, let's say, in some way to maybe suggest how to go about it. So I would suggest to that, generally speaking, the exhalation part of the breath is the more, we would call it langhana. So it's more of the relaxing part, right? It gives parasympathetic system a chance to slow down and sort of be calm, and that gives a different message to our body. It does take practice. So it's not, like I said, it's not like magic, like if you have this or if you are feeling that, do this and it'll all get better. It takes time, it takes practice, and there's a lot of information out there though about yoga and anxiety. So I would encourage that person to look into that and maybe practice with a yoga teacher familiar with that. And there are yoga therapists as well who are much more versed in working one-on-one with people in that situation. So I'm hesitant to say, do this and, it'll take care of that. But generally speaking, focusing on the exhalation, maybe focusing on a pleasing thing, it might be more useful to walk or to move the body. It really depends on a number of factors.
All right. Well, we're at the end of our session. There's a lot of great feedback. People are very grateful for your presentation and found it helpful. And others were sharing resources too, which is really wonderful to see. So
Excellent.
thank you for attending.
Lizzie, will all that be part of what's shared? Do you know, or?
Oh, will the transcript be shared? I don't believe that the transcript will be shared.
Okay.
But
That's okay. I'm just curious. Yeah. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Lizzie. And reach out if you have any additional questions or just want to chat some more about it.
I think we can stop the recording.
Yep.